Close your eyes and let the modern world fade away. We are traveling to a time when the halls of Asgard echoed with the footsteps of gods, and the silence of a single morning could shatter the peace of the 9 realms. Thor awoke in his great hall, Mjölnir, to a quiet that felt wrong. The air, usually humming with the latent power of his hammer, was still. His hand reached for the nightstand, finding only empty space where Mjölnir should have rested. A cold dread, colder than the winds of Niflheim, settled in his chest. The thunder god was without his thunder. His rage was not a sudden explosion, but a deep, simmering tempest that darkened his face. He knew of only one being in all the realms who would dare such a theft, whose very nature was chaos wrapped in a smile. He went to find Loki. He found the trickster in a sunlit field, an arrow nocked in his bow. Thor's shadow fell over him, and Loki turned to see a fury that could level mountains. Before a word was spoken, Thor's powerful hand was around Loki's throat. "Where is it?" he growled, the words rumbling like distant thunder. "I will tear the realms apart to find my hammer." Loki, gasping, swore his innocence with a sincerity that was almost believable. "I did not take it, but I will find it. I owe you that much." Thor released him, his eyes narrowed. Trust was a fragile thing between them, but necessity was a powerful motivator. Loki went to the goddess Freyja and borrowed her cloak of falcon feathers. Donning the plumage, he became a speck against the sky, flying across the Bifrost into the frozen expanse of Jotunheim, the land of the giants. The journey was long, the landscape a monochrome of white snow and grey rock, until he found the hall of the giant Thrym. The giant king sat on a throne of stone, a hulking figure whose poor eyesight made him squint at the feathered visitor. "Who comes to my hall?" Thrym boomed. "I am Loki," he said, landing softly. "I come from Asgard. We seek the hammer Mjölnir." A slow, deep laugh echoed through the hall. "I have it," Thrym confessed, a smug grin spreading across his broad face. "It is buried 8 miles beneath the earth, and you will not have it back unless I receive the goddess Freyja as my bride." Loki's heart sank. He flew back to Asgard, the weight of the impossible demand heavy on his wings. He delivered the news to Thor, who erupted in a fury that shook the very foundations of Mjölnir. "Give him Freyja? Never! Then you must go yourself," Loki said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The plan he outlined was so audacious, so humiliating, that Thor could only stare in disbelief. He proposed that Thor, the mightiest of the Aesir, dress as a bride. He would don a veil and a gown, and Loki would present him to the near-blind Thrym as the fair Freyja. Thor's refusal was immediate, his pride a wall against the suggestion. But as he looked at the empty space where his hammer should be, he felt the vulnerability of all Asgard. Power, he realized, sometimes demands a compromise that wounds the spirit. With a grumble that promised future retribution against the trickster, he agreed. The dressing was an ordeal of its own. Sif's finest wedding dress was fetched, a garment of white silk and lace. Thor's massive frame strained the seams. The bodice was tight, the sleeves too short. A veil was placed over his fiery red hair and beard. He stood there, a vision of divine power, trapped in an absurd disguise, his embarrassment a palpable heat. "If a single soul in Asgard hears of this," Thor warned Loki, his voice a low threat, "your mischief will be at an end, permanently." Loki, trying and failing to suppress a grin, merely nodded. "You look radiant." And so the most unlikely wedding party stepped onto the Bifrost. A god in a dress and his smirking handmaiden, journeying toward a feast of deception. They arrived at Thrym's hall, a vast cavern of a place where the wind howled outside, but a great hearth fire crackled within, casting long, dancing shadows. The giant king awaited his bride, his poor eyes seeing only a blur of white and a smaller figure beside her. "Welcome," Thrym roared with delight. "Bring my beautiful Freyja to me. Let the feast begin." The hall was filled with giants, their laughter booming as they took their places at the long tables. Platters of food were brought forth. A whole roasted ox, 8 salmon glistening with oil, great wheels of cheese, and casks of the finest ale. Thor, playing his part, was seated beside the giant king. And then the god's appetite took over. The hunger of a deity, suppressed by rage and humiliation, now emerged. He consumed the entire ox. He ate the 8 salmon, bones, and all. He washed it down with 3 entire casks of ale. The giants watched, their feasting slowing to a stop, their faces a mixture of awe and confusion. No bride, no matter how divine, had ever eaten with such ferocious abandon. Thrym leaned toward Loki, his brow furrowed. "I have never seen a maiden with such a hunger," he muttered, his voice laced with suspicion. Loki, the master of quick thinking, leaned in close. "Your Highness," he whispered confidentially, "the fair Freyja has not eaten for 8 full days, so great was her desire to journey here to you. Her passion is as immense as her beauty." This seemed to satisfy the giant, and he chuckled. But a moment later, another problem arose. Thrym, wanting to gaze upon his bride, tried to lift her veil. Thor's eyes, burning with a fury he could barely contain, met the giant's squinting gaze. Thrym recoiled. "Why are her eyes so fierce?" he asked Loki, alarmed. "They burn like embers in a forge." Loki did not miss a beat. "Your Highness," he said smoothly, "she has not slept for 8 nights. So great was her excitement to meet her mighty groom. The fire in her eyes is the fire of her love for you." Thrym, flattered and fooled, beamed with pride. The feast continued, the tension in the hall thickening with every moment. Thor sat in seething silence, his hand itching for the feel of his hammer, the ridiculous dress feeling tighter with every passing second. The deception was a fragile thread, and it was stretching to its breaking point. The giant, pleased with his cleverness in securing a goddess, decided it was time to sanctify the union. He called for the one item that would make the wedding official, the object that had brought them all to this precarious moment. "Bring forth the hammer," Thrym commanded. "Place it in my bride's lap, that we may be blessed by its power." The moment the hammer was laid upon his lap, the charade ended. The familiar weight, the cool feel of the enchanted metal, it was a trigger. In one fluid, explosive motion, Thor's hands shot out. One seized the handle of Mjölnir, the other ripped the delicate veil from his head, tearing the silken gown as he rose to his full, terrifying height. The giant king stared, his poor eyes struggling to comprehend the transformation. The beautiful bride was gone, replaced by the red-bearded, rage-filled god of thunder. "This is not Freyja," Thrym roared, stumbling back from the table. "No!" Thor's voice thundered through the hall, no longer disguised. "It is Thor." And with that declaration, he swung Mjölnir. The first blow caught Thrym square in the skull, and the crack of bone echoed louder than any winter gale. The hall erupted into chaos as the other giants surged forward, but they were no match for a thunder god reunited with his power. Thor moved through them like a storm, and the cozy hall became a slaughterhouse. The crackling fire now illuminating a scene of divine retribution. It is worth pausing here, in the midst of this violence, to understand the laughter woven into this myth. In the Norse world, the inversion of a powerful figure's identity, especially a hyper-masculine god like Thor, being forced into a feminine role, was a classic source of comedy. The humor wasn't in the disguise itself, but in the tension it created, in the mighty being brought low by necessity, making his ultimate victory all the more satisfying. When the last giant lay still, the only sounds were the moan of the wind outside and the ragged breath of the victor. Thor stood amid the carnage, the blood-spattered wedding dress hanging in tatters from his shoulders. Loki, who had wisely observed the carnage from a safe distance, finally approached, a wry smile playing on his lips. Thor merely glared. Mjölnir held tight in his grip, the promise of their journey home hanging silently between them. They returned to Asgard in silence, the hammer restored to its rightful place at Thor's side. The compromise was over, the power reclaimed, but the memory of the dress and the feast lingered, a quiet lesson on the strange hospitality required to survive in the 9 realms. The snow continued to fall. Outside Mjölnir, a gentle blanket over the day's absurdity. If these ancient stories bring you a moment of peace, we invite you to join us again for another journey into the past.